Emma sat by the window, cradling a cup of chamomile tea, her fingers tracing absent patterns along the ceramic rim. The warm glow of the bedside lamp softened the edges of the room, casting long shadows that danced with a flickering candle on the nightstand. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside their apartment everything was still, peaceful, or so it seemed. Daniel was in the bathroom, humming softly as the shower ran. A familiar sound, comforting in its routine. He always took his showers before bed, always let the steam fog up the mirror, always kissed her forehead before turning off the lights. Their life was structured, predictable. But something had shifted. Emma couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the change began. Perhaps it had been gradual, slipping between the cracks of their daily routine like sand through clenched fingers. At first, it was easy to dismiss the small things. The extra hours at work, the occasional missed text, the moments where he seemed distracted even when he was right in front of her. Everyone got busy. That was life. But then there were the other things. The cologne, subtle but different. The way he placed his phone screen down on the table. The laughter he shared with someone over the phone. A laugh she hadn't heard in weeks. And now the text message. It had been a single glance, no more than a second, but long enough for her to see it. A notification flashing on his screen as he set his phone on the dresser. "I can't wait to see you again. No name." Just the words, curling around her mind like a slow-moving fog. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was someone from work, a client, a colleague. She wanted to believe that. Needed to believe that. The water shut off. Moments later, Daniel emerged from the bathroom, a towel slung around his waist, steam curling from his skin. He caught her watching him and smiled. "What?" he asked, running a hand through damp hair. Emma hesitated. A part of her wanted to ask, to hold up his phone and demand an explanation. But another part, the part that still believed in the man she had married, was afraid of what she might hear. "Nothing," she said instead, forcing a small smile. "Just thinking." He crossed the room, pressing a kiss to her forehead before climbing into bed. "Don't think too hard," he murmured, chuckling. "It's late." She nodded, setting her tea aside and slipping under the covers beside him. But as she lay there, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts churned. Tomorrow she would call Mark. She needed to talk to someone. The next afternoon, Emma met Mark at a quiet cafe tucked away from the city's main streets. He was already seated by the window when she arrived, stirring a sugar cube into his coffee. He glanced up as she approached, his sharp blue eyes immediately scanning her face. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Emma sank into it, exhaling. "I didn't." Mark leaned back, studying her. They had been friends since college, long before Daniel had come into the picture. He had seen her through breakups, job changes, the uncertainty of her 20s. If anyone could read her, it was him. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he prompted. She hesitated, fingers playing with the edge of her napkin. "I think something's wrong with Daniel." Mark didn't react right away. He took a sip of his coffee, giving her space to continue. "He's been distant," she admitted. "And I saw a message on his phone last night. Something about seeing someone again." Mark set his cup down. "Did you ask him about it?" "No." He frowned. "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid of the answer." Emma swallowed hard. "What if I'm just overthinking?" Mark sighed, drumming his fingers against the table. "Emma, you're smart. You don't jump to conclusions without reason." He paused. "But you need proof before you let your mind spiral. Don't assume the worst unless you have a reason to." She nodded, but the unease in her chest didn't lessen. Proof. Did she really want it? Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. "Daniel. Working late tonight. Don't wait up." A chill settled in her stomach. "Not again." She looked up at Mark. He had seen the message too. "You could follow him," he said carefully. "See where he goes." Emma's breath caught. It was reckless, dangerous. But wasn't it worse to live in uncertainty? She had told Daniel she couldn't handle dishonesty, that if trust was broken, she wouldn't be able to stay. And yet he was proving her wrong. She met Mark's gaze, her decision solidifying. Then I guess I need to know the truth. The city lights blurred through the windshield as Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythmic drumming loud enough to drown out the quiet hum of the radio. She had never done anything like this before. Never imagined herself trailing her own husband through dimly lit streets, her breath catching every time his car turned a corner. Yet here she was. Daniel's message had been brief. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. The words had settled uneasily in her stomach, echoing all the other nights he had said the same. She had wanted to believe him, to accept the explanation without question. But the text message from the night before still clung to her thoughts, a whisper of doubt she couldn't ignore. Now, watching his taillights disappear into the parking lot of a quiet, upscale restaurant, she felt the last pieces of denial slip away. This wasn't work. She pulled into a spot a safe distance away, her hands trembling as she turned off the engine. Through the large front windows of the restaurant, she spotted Daniel immediately. He wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, her long dark hair cascading over one shoulder as she leaned in, speaking softly. The intimate tilt of her head, the way Daniel smiled. His real smile, the one he used to save for Emma, made something inside her crack. She forced herself to stay rooted to the spot, even as every instinct screamed at her to march inside, to demand an explanation. But she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead she watched. Daniel reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly against the woman's wrist. The gesture was fleeting but unmistakable. Emma's stomach twisted. For a moment she couldn't breathe. It was one thing to suspect, to wonder if she was imagining things. It was another to see it with her own eyes. Her phone vibrated in her lap. She glanced down. Mark. Are you okay?
Well.
But she typed a different answer. I was right. Was. Mark. Where are you? She hesitated. Did she want him here? Did she want anyone to see her like this? Shattered, humiliated? But then Daniel laughed, the sound muffled through the glass, and she realized she couldn't do this alone. Emma. Near 5th and Lexington. The Italian place. Mark's reply was immediate. Mark, stay there. I'm coming. She set the phone down, her fingers curling into fists. Inside, Daniel and the woman, Lena, she realized suddenly, recognizing her now, continued their quiet, secret world, oblivious to the fact that the illusion was breaking apart just outside. Lena. An old acquaintance. Someone Emma had never given much thought to, until now. The pieces clicked into place. The late nights. The sudden distance. The perfume that wasn't hers. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, forcing down the wave of nausea rising in her throat. Minutes passed, maybe more. She barely noticed when a car pulled up beside hers, when the passenger door opened and Mark slid in. He didn't speak right away. Just followed her gaze through the windshield. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. How long have they been here? Emma swallowed hard. Long enough. Mark exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Emma. I don't need you to tell me what to do, she interrupted, her voice raw. I needed to see it. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Mark nodded. Okay. Emma turned back to the restaurant. Daniel was still smiling. Still leaning in like she had never existed. And that's when she knew. There was no salvaging this. She had told Daniel once, long before marriage, long before the vows, that if he ever betrayed her she wouldn't stay. She had meant it. Yet here she was, still sitting in the car watching. Mark shifted beside her. Do you want to go home?
Well.
I don't know. He didn't push. Just reached over, squeezing her hand lightly. A small anchor in the storm. Emma took a shaky breath. I need to talk to him. Mark nodded. Then let's go. And for the first time that night, she let herself move. Emma stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady beneath her. The restaurant's warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk, wrapping the night in a deceptive sense of comfort. But there was no comfort here. Only betrayal, thick in the air like the scent of roasted garlic and aged wine. Mark stayed beside her, silent but steady. He wouldn't intervene unless she needed him to, and for that she was grateful. This was her battle to fight. Through the large front window, Daniel was still laughing, still leaning toward Lena as if Emma didn't exist. As if the past 7 years of their life together were nothing more than a forgettable chapter in his story. A hollow ache spread through her chest, but she pushed it down. She wouldn't break. Not here. Not in front of him. With measured steps, she walked toward the entrance, her fingers curling into fists. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside, but Daniel didn't notice her at first. Neither did Lena. They were too absorbed in each other. Then, as Emma closed the distance, Daniel's gaze lifted, and the moment their eyes met, everything changed. The warmth drained from his face. His easy smile vanished. His fingers stiffened around the stem of his wine glass. "Emma!" His voice was tight, controlled, but not enough to mask the guilt flickering in his eyes. Lena turned then, confusion knitting her brows before understanding dawned. She looked at Daniel, then back at Emma, her lips parting slightly, as if debating whether to speak. Emma beat her to it. "Don't bother," she said, her voice sharper than she expected. "I know exactly who you are." Lena had the decency to look away. Daniel straightened, pushing his chair back. "Emma, let's talk," she interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping. "You want to talk now?" A few patrons glanced their way, sensing the storm brewing at table 7. Emma didn't care. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Not here." "Why not?" she shot back. "Afraid someone might hear how much of a liar you are." His jaw tensed. "Lower your voice." Emma let out a slow breath. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She was here for the truth he had tried so hard to hide. She turned to Lena. "How long?" Lena hesitated, eyes flicking to Daniel as if seeking permission. Emma's stomach twisted. She already had her answer. Long enough for Lena to care what Daniel thought. Long enough for her to be complicit in the lie. Daniel stepped between them, his voice low, urgent. "Let's go outside." Emma studied him. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. The man who had shattered it all. For a moment, she thought of every memory they had shared, every promise they had made. And then she thought of the message on his phone. Perfume. The laughter that wasn't meant for her. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "No." Daniel blinked. "What?" Emma lifted her chin. "I don't need to hear your excuses. I don't need to hear you say you didn't mean for this to happen." Her voice didn't waver. "Because you did mean for it to happen. Every time you texted her. Every time you lied. Every time you chose her over me." Daniel's expression cracked, something raw flashing across his features. "Emma, But she wasn't done. "I told you once," she said, stepping back. "I told you I couldn't handle this." A humorless smile curved her lips. "And you proved me wrong." Daniel's throat bobbed, his hands twitching at his sides as if he wanted to reach for her. But Emma had already turned away. She didn't need to hear another word. She had all the answers she needed. As she stepped outside, the cold air stung her cheeks, but it couldn't touch the fire burning inside her. Mark was still waiting by the car, his gaze searching hers as she approached. "Well?" he asked quietly. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It's over." And for the first time that night she felt free.